What's up people, it's Ross Fader back once again. Last time we were building pads using BA1 and Amigo, and this time I'm going to show you how you can turn this Apache brake into something like this. So buckle up, keep it locked. I'm going to show you all of my techniques to make brakes sound unique and interesting. Here we go. Alright, first things first. So we got a copy of that Apache brake from the 0G Jungle Warfare 3. Now that's all over the internet, anyone can kind of find that, and it's a great pack full of heaps of samples that you can twist and turn into whatever your heart desires. So let's drag that into our Amigo sampler, and what I've done here is the auto slice, but I've set it to equal quadrants. So what happens if you set it on trans? Sometimes you will lose some of the groove to the brake. So you can see right here, some of the slices are not quite on where those hats are hitting, and I've left it that way on purpose because I want to retain some of the groove of that Apache brake. Now, as long as my kicks and snares are hitting in the right place, then everything will kind of fit together, and the other brakes I lay up behind it will stay in time, but it will maintain some groove. The other thing I've done to start with here, I've kind of locked the stretch on. Now, that makes things a little bit easier because instead of having two automation lanes, one for stretch on and off and one for the percentage, all I need to do is adjust that percentage up and down and set that in my automation lane. But we'll get into more of that as we move along. The other thing I've got here is a gate, and that's just as soon as the little bit of MIDI stops, it's going to kind of stop the brake right there. So that's important, especially when we're kind of pitching up and down. So let's look at the opening 8 bars. What I've done here is cut up the MIDI just like that. Pretty easy because they're all even quadrants, and I've left some gaps, and I'll show you what I've turned on there is the Echoboy. Echoboy, great delay plugin, but you can really use anything. As I said, I use Valhalla Massive a lot, and that's free. This Echoboy is quite a bit pricier, but you can also use your stock delay kind of plugin. Everything will work. There's nothing special here. It's just a 1/8 delay. Let's have a listen to that. Nice little gap there with that echo kind of trailing off, and I put a vocal to kind of fill in the space there as well, so give it a little bit of old school flavor. And of course, we've got my usual kind of chain, which is the Focusrite, bumping up the lows and highs, taking some out of that 300 area, and giving a little plus around that 5K, get a bit more color. And of course, we've got the LA2A, awesome compressor, and cranking that up as well. Other things I've added here is a clipper, some EQ, just where the kick hits and where some of the hats and stuff hit, and I put a limiter and a transient shaper to up the attack, just to make every little hit a bit harder. And the limiter will come into play when I start using the flanger effects, kind of pumps up the volume, and I want want everything to kind of stay around the same volume. The next few things we add are all going to be within the Amigo, and that's why I love this so much. It's such a versatile kind of one-stop shop for a bunch of editing. Normally this stuff would take ages using a Kaiser, and it's not quite the same sound, but just the fact that I can have it in the DAW and automate all the lanes is gonna be a huge selling point for me every single time. 3 things we're doing. 1, changing that stretch length. As I said, at the moment it's at 100%, and we will automate that kind of up and down. You just make the lane wider to do those little adjustments. Reverse, we automate that kind of on and off. There we go there. And the pitch, so it's great, you can kind of automate that pitch there. You see I step it up and down, and then we'll talk about this flanger as well. So the flanger, another thing, just stock flanger, nothing really special. So it's about 3/4 in the mix, a little bit of feedback, and it's going to give it some cool effects there. So now for some really basic layering, and I've kept that Apache edit. I just changed a bunch of things there, as you can see with the automation lane, and I've just put a hat behind it and a think break that's kind of cut up in a few different ways, a couple little reverses in there just to give it a little bit more depth. And we've taken another pad out of that Jungle Warfare 3. This is the wash pad right down the bottom, and we've just got a really simple progression there. Very cool. So here's another example of what we can do with a nifty little VST on top of that Apache break. So I've bounced down what I had up here from the Amigo, and I've pulled it into its own channel, and I'm using this. It's called Freezr. So I think it kind of came free when I bought something else from Plugin Boutique. It's pretty cool. You can hit this kind of random button, and it's going to give you a bunch of different little rolls and pitch shifts and all that kind of good stuff. You can up how much you want it to affect, and the smoothness and the complexity. But let's have a little listen to what Freezr does to that Apache. Add an 808 to that. So another thing I did before I started making this tune, I headed on over to Chris the Scientist. So he made a comment on my last video. It was very nice of him to do so, and he does lots of cool breakdowns. So if you haven't checked him out yet, head on over to Chris the Scientist over on YouTube and watch some of those cool tutorials. I went to the website and went into the shop, and I picked up his new sample pack called Dreamcore. Now, here's a couple of the breaks we pulled out of it. We've got that Ghost Break Donkey Kong version, and we've got that Power Puff break. Also pulled out this very cool PlayStation pad. So let's have a listen to the pad by itself. Very cool, and I've taken his 90s respace and put that underneath, and also made a little pad of my own and dropped it into the Amigo. So let's listen to the little pad there. And that was done in the same kind of way by resampling something and dragging it back into the Amigo. So let's hear those three together. And with some breaks. So another thing I've used here on that Ghost Break is an FX modulator. So you can put a bunch of different things together: flanger, reverb, width, filter. This is a stock plugin within Cubase 12, and it's pretty powerful. You can do some cool stuff with it. So let's have a listen to that soloed. And that kind of goes into all of the other breaks together. Absolutely love all of those samples from Chris the Scientist. Big ups, Chris. Another really simple thing in a lot of jungle tunes, you get a Rhodes sample and just play it out. And I've just put a compressor and some saturation on that. So I've used the saturation within Neutron, and you can dial it into retro and warm, tape and tube, and kind of pump it up through that. Really simple thing to do with vocals. Grab a little lick, kind of bounce it down, and then reverse it. If you've got plenty of delay, it'll sound really cool. Have a listen to this. And sprinkle that around until you get the desired amount of uniqueness. Something else for beginners out there in jungle, and this whole video is about kind of making jungle easy. Is to use a bit of a reference track. So I've taken something from Blue Skin Badger. It's called Bout You Baby. Absolutely wicked tune. Go and pick that up if you can. And I've just kind of followed the same patterns that they have used. Once you have made enough tunes, you won't really need to do that. But when I was starting out, this was a great way to understand the structure of a different style I came from breakbeat hardcore, so I really had to get my head around what other jungle producers were doing when I wanted to start making that sound. So there you have it. We've taken an Apache break, we've run it through the Amigo sampler, we've used some samples from Jungle Warfare and Chris the Scientist, and we've used Freezr and a bunch of other delays and reverbs and flanges to make something very, very unique. Let's give it a playthrough, and until next time, peace.